Hello and welcome back to the BCR Dawson sub. This update will cover work undertaken during October 2022, during which I have been busy on various layout sections getting them ready for reinstallation. So let's have a look at those. At the end of last month's video, the extension for the Fort St. John subdivision was ready for track, with the balsa sub roadbed now sanded into a gentle ramp. I took this section down to the workshop to prepare it for the installation of wiring. I installed flat cable clamps for the DCC command bus, and I drilled holes for the cable clamps which are going to secure the auxiliary bus and track bus wires. At the right end of this section, I drilled passage holes for the wires which will pass through the wall to reach the new sections for Septimus. With the Highway 97 section and the Fort St. John subdivision extension temporarily in place, I sanded the sub roadbed for a smooth transition between the two sections. A terminal block was located and installed to connect the auxiliary bus and track bus wires between sections. A second one will be installed at the opposite end when I get there. I also installed a modular jack to provide a similar connection between sections for the DCC command bus. On the Highway 97 section, the top was screwed down with number 8 screws to secure it in place. This sequence of photographs shows the installation of the track bed for the Fort St. John subdivision. I used the Woodland Scenics foam tack glue for this purpose. Here we see the completed track bed extending towards and through the backdrop. And here is the view from the rear of this layout section. The next step was to fabricate and install the super elevation. I assembled this from layered strips of masking tape. With this length of curve, I probably get up to about 5 or 6 layers of tape at the middle of the curve. This photograph shows the super elevation extending around the curve. And this is the other end on the rear of the layout section. With a length of track temporarily pinned in place, the holes for the feeder wires are marked and drilled, and the feeder wires are then soldered to the rails. The track with feeder wires is then installed for a test fit. This sequence of photographs shows the track being glued down onto the track bed, again using the Woodland Scenics foam tack glue. The glue dries clear and does a good job of holding the track securely in place. Due to the difficulty of access underneath the top of this layout section, I decided to solder feeder wires to the bus wires as well as to the track. With the track now in place, these wires were then soldered together and covered with heat shrink to prevent any possible shorts. Here is the Fort St. John subdivision track after it's been installed and after the completion of wiring. And here's the other end of that track section on the rear of the layout section. Here we have the completed trackage for the Fort St. John subdivision across this section of the layout. The track's been installed on the track bed and it extends across this span and through the backdrop onto the rear shelf. Down here you can see an example of those feeder wires I was talking about. So due to the difficulty of access underneath here, I attached feeder wires to the bus wires, I attached feeders to the track, and then once the track was installed, I connected the two pairs of wires together and applied heat shrink to prevent any shorts. So this section of track is now ready for a test run, and we'll see how well it all works. At this stage, the Highway 97 section was lifted onto its brackets to enable further work on the Fort St. John extension. This section requires final leveling and a new coat of paint on the backdrop, but it is otherwise now ready for service. With the Fort St. John extension temporarily in place, the trackbed was installed. This view is looking back towards the Highway 97 section. And this view is looking in the opposite direction. The rerailer is the first section of track for the extension. And this close-up shows the trackbed passing through the wall, viewed from the layout room. And here is the trackbed coming through the wall, viewed from the other side. The extra trackbed you see will be secured to the section for Septimus, and it will then be cut to provide a smooth transition from one section to the next. This photograph shows the track being installed along the extension with feeder wires extending below. And here's the completed trackage extending along and through the wall. I placed a second rerailer before the curve through the wall. The thinking was to provide a safeguard against trains potentially derailing on the curves at either end of this hidden trackage, and perhaps the rerailer can help them to get back on track again. This is the end of trackage viewed from the bedroom side of the wall. This section of track will connect to the trackage on the new Septimus sections. At this point, a test run under DC power was made to check the performance of the newly laid track. This is a photograph of the train at the end of trackage after a successful test run. The extension section was removed and the wiring for the DCC command bus, auxiliary bus, and track bus was installed. The feeder wires were connected to the track bus wires, and a terminal block was installed at the right end of the extension to provide a connection to the wires which will pass through the wall and go on to Septimus. This is the short section which sits inside the wall with track and feeder wires installed. These will connect to a short length of bus wires which will pass through the wall below this section. This view shows the wiring connections between the Highway 97 and Fort St. John subdivision sections. So they plug into either side of the terminal block, and this allows for an easy disconnection if required. Here is the extension back in place in the layout room with all of the wiring installed. And this is another view in the opposite direction. The wiring will continue from the terminal block and through the wall to reach Septimus. You can also see that the command bus has some extra length in order to enable it to pass through the wall. A final test run under DC power was made to verify performance of the track, now that all of the feeders have been connected to the track bus. This train included an 85-foot trailer flat car with a trailer, and this was for the purpose of performing a clearance check as the train passes through the wall. Here is the extension for the Fort St. John subdivision after I've installed the track and the wiring. Down at the left end you can see the terminal block which provides the connections between layout sections for the auxiliary bus and the track bus wires, and there's a modular jack for connection of the DCC command bus. And down at the other end of the extension is another terminal block which will allow the connections for the wiring going into Septimus. You can see the wall has been chamfered here to allow trains to pass through the wall. This section is now ready for a test run. This is a test run over the new trackage for the Fort St. John subdivision. We're leaving the Highway 97 section and we're now proceeding along the extension towards the passage through the wall. Turning now to the two sections for Trombley, which will go above the extension section, the two leads for the LED lighting, which had to be cut when the layout was moved, have been reattached and tested. Underneath these sections, a cable return to power the LED lighting for the Septimus sections was installed along and through the rear stringer. The two sections for Trombley were brought into the layout room for a test fit so that I could mark the location for the LED lighting lead that's going to pass through the wall. This lead can be seen hanging down below the benchwork. And this is another view of the Trombley sections during the test fit in the layout room. It was necessary to move a light switch in the bedroom up a few inches prior to installing the sections for Septimus. This move required that the previous opening for the light switch be filled and painted. And on the two new sections for Septimus, the LED lighting was installed and tested. It was easier to do this while the units were upside down, so we did this prior to hanging them on the wall. These are the sections for Trombley, which are currently standing on end. And if I pan down here to the bottom, you can see the two LED leads which had to be cut when we removed the layout. Those have now been reattached and they're ready for service. Over on this half, you can see the LED return that we've installed along the rear stringer. That comes all the way back to here, goes through the rear stringer, and this is going to connect through the wall for the LED lighting for Septimus. And if I pan to my left and I ask Michael to turn off the video light, we can see the bench work for Septimus with all of the LED lighting illuminated. This is one strip of peel and stick lighting, 3500 Kelvin warm white. And it was installed while the benchwork was upside down just to make it easier to get it in there. And there we go. These two sections are now ready for hanging. I would like to thank my friends Michael, Mark, Nolan, and John who helped with various aspects of this month's work. As always, their assistance is greatly appreciated. I hope that you have enjoyed this layout update. During November, I hope to get the Fort St. John subdivision and the Septimus sections mounted permanently on the walls, and then track laying and wiring can proceed on into Septimus. If you've enjoyed this update, please consider liking and subscribing to this channel. My website has now been migrated to a professional hosting service and it seems to be working well. I've posted some new updates, so I invite you to have a look at bcrdawsonsub.ca. Thank you for watching, and until next time, peace be with you.